Mr. Peter Douglas.
Hello.
All right, let's just go back into talking about what we were talking about with the restaurant because I wanted to finish that off. So when you say that you make friendships that you think are like for life or a lifetime of friendships and everything,
Right.
and then you end up getting invited to a party where you only go for 2 minutes and then leave, was that really friendship?
Well, no, I didn't go for 2 minutes, so I went for the whole thing. But the thing was, like, my conversations with people where I was expecting to, like, actually, like, catch up and be like, hey, I haven't seen you in, like, a year or two. Like, some of them I hadn't seen in a couple of years. So, some of them had, like, children or whatever, like, major life events. And I thought, like, oh, okay, like, we're going to catch up or they're going to ask. And I think the part, like, I think I tried, and this isn't, like, to toot my own horn, but, like, I was like, oh, okay, like, you tell me about your life. Like, I'm interested to hear about what happened. But I didn't feel like it was reciprocated. So, and oftentimes,
But see, isn't that with conversations with anybody that you get
Absolutely.
into? I mean, like, I feel like I see people that I haven't seen in years, and then, like, we're so excited to see everything, and then they just don't care about anything that I'm talking about.
And I think that's how you know, like, they're, like, you have a good friend. Like, the people that I, like, know are good friends, that are almost, like, lifelong friends, are the ones that I don't even necessarily always see the most.
Okay.
But it's the ones that when you do reconnect or when you see them, it's, like, just as easy to pick back up. And you're, like, both care. And it's like, oh, like, it's been 2 years, but I didn't even, like, realize because you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like that. I have a couple friends like that where we haven't probably seen each other in, like, 2 or 3 years. And then I'll go and see them and then just be like, what's going on? And it just catches up right where you left off.
Right.
So it's always good to have friendships. Well, my friend, I'm glad to have you on the podcast.
Hey, glad to be here. It's a pleasure.
What I wanted to first talk to you about, well, first, Mr. Peter Douglas is a good friend of mine. We met probably 2 years ago, I would say now.
Yeah, I think so. Year and a half, 2 years ago, something like that. I don't even know how we met.
Here's the thing.
It's like most of my friends, I'm like, I don't know.
I don't remember how I met Peter and how we started hanging out.
I think it was living room.
I do remember that I saw you at the living room.
Right.
And then Troy, who was on, and my roommate at the time, was more of the outgoing, trying to connect with everybody. Legend. Yeah, if that's what you want to call it. He's already conceited enough.
Troy, if you're listening to this, you're not actually a legend. I love you, though.
But for those of you that are listening and don't know what the living room is, it is a... what would you call that? It's like a...
So it's like... so it's a young adults... they call it ministry. It's honestly a church. I think we get too complicated.
It's like second service or third service for the worship center.
Yeah, I mean, basically. Yeah. So it's on Tuesday nights, and it's essentially functions as a church just for young people, ages 18 to 35. It used to be 30. They keep bumping it up, so maybe it'll be 40. Maybe I'll be going when I'm 50. They'll be like, well, it's young people, 18 to 50, something like that. But yeah, so that's honestly, it's actually my church right now. I'm not going to a traditional
like Sunday
intergenerational church that we meet for an hour and a half or whatever, and then we go home and maybe have potluck some Sundays.
And you used to I don't want to say met you, but how I knew of you was you used to do this thing before the living room actually started out in the hallway of the worship center called the soapbox.
Yeah, that was a good time.
What inspired that / what the heck was that?
So that was like my entire like reputation for a time. So when I had to give it up, it was like I was giving up my identity because people were like, "Oh, I know you're like that soapbox guy, right?" And so I was like the soapbox guy for like years at the living room, and that was like who I was. But no, so that started before. So Shannon Kahn, who is the pastor right now of the living room, he actually didn't start that. It was Bryce who was the pastor before. I'm not sure if you met.
Oh,
Bryce,
yeah.
Bryce Taylor.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, I have some crazy Bryce stories.
Yeah, he's a cool guy. So Bryce and I think Dustin Lee had this idea of just kind of because like I guess they would just start the service, and I'm not sure that I was a soapbox guy. I should know the origin story, right? But I just know they were like, oh, we should get some like testimonies or like we should have a way to kind of like start the night that's not just like, hey, welcome, and then we enter into the service or whatever. Yeah. Because everybody would gather. They're big into community, and so everybody would gather. In the lobby. We had free coffee and stuff, so people would be mingling and everything, and so it'd be kind of sometimes hard to get everybody even in the auditorium too.
Yeah.
And so this was a way that we could do two things, which was one, have people. Well, three things really, because you got to have people share their testimony, so they got to have that opportunity, the individual. The crowd got the opportunity to hear that testimony, and then it also functioned as a way to kind of like crowd control, so after, every testimony, I would have to be like, all right, like we're going in, get in there, whatever.
All right, look, Peter got stern sometimes too when people were acting up and everything like that on the soapbox.
People are animals.
He scared me one time. I mean, he was just like, okay, guys, we need to calm down here, respect people that are talking.
No, it's true. Well, we had so many issues.
Yeah.
Originally, it started, we actually had what are those called? Is it like a megaphone, I guess? A megaphone.
Like a megaphone? Like.
Yeah. So that was our original like sound system. We had a megaphone that we would corral everybody with, like, come over here, and listen to this person.
Yeah.
And then, but then the person wouldn't even have the megaphone. They would just kind of like shout. And I was like, that was actually, hey, now I will toot my own horn.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, we need to like figure out a different way because half the people can't hear, because there are 400 people in this lobby.
Yeah.
Only 50 people, that are around the perimeter of this little box can actually hear what's going on because everybody else is just talking and screaming and doing everything else young adults do. Hopefully not everything else, but so
PG.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm done. The podcast is over. No. So anyway, so then I was like, oh, we need to get a sound system. So we got a little Fender system. And even then, it was still really hard to get everybody under control. But it was a cool time. Because people got to share their testimonies. And
well, it moved from out of the where was it? It was in the lobby, and then we moved it to the auditorium.
Yeah, and so that would have been 2018, I believe. Yeah, it would have been 2018.
Okay. When
that happened, and that was actually when I transitioned out. So we,
okay.
So yeah, because we had so many people, and we were kind of like changing the service a little bit, and we figured, to get the most, people actually engaged with the story, it actually worked to have it in the auditorium, just because, again, the dynamic out in the lobby was just
I like the dynamic in the lobby.
It was cool.
As crazy as that sounds, because it seemed more personable to me. Because we weren't shooting it live. It wasn't on
professional.
Camera. It wasn't professional.
Yeah.
It was just, you getting up, hyping up the person coming on. They would give. I mean, I heard great testimonies there.
Yeah.
I mean, there was times where people were in tears from these things.
Right. Yeah.
So I mean, it was. I thought it was a fun time. But so when you transitioned out of doing this soapbox, were you still doing things within the living room?
Yeah, so I was still technically on front door team. So they have different teams, and one of them was front door. It's actually front door crew now. They combined two teams, but it was front door, and so I was a greeter or whatever, and I helped people at the front desk and things like that, set of signs. It's a great team. But then after I left the soapbox, I was just in a different season at the time, and I just kind of felt like, oh, is the living room like something I actually want to, invest in, because one of my problems is I tend to be a yes man, and I just invest in a bunch of stuff or try to invest in a bunch of stuff. So I just felt like I was supposed to step away for a little bit, so I stepped away and just, excuse me, I just started attending, not leading at all, for like 6 months, and then I came back into leading.
Okay.
So then I joined the team that I'm on right now, which is Team Equip, and that's one I help lead currently. So
Team Equip.
Yeah.
Does Elena do that? Elena Dole?
Yeah. Shout out to Elena.
Yeah.
What's up?
She was she now has taken over the group that I started through the worship center.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know if they're still meeting or not. I hope they are. Elena, I hope you guys are still meeting.
Yeah, you better be. Give me a call.
But no, I've heard a lot of good things about Equip, and I just hope that it is really pouring into people the way that it was intended to. At least,
I mean, that's our goal. That's honestly the goal. I think we can have all these structures, we can have all these details and all these desires, but at the end of the day, I tell people at the beginning of the class, if you exit, it's an 8-week class. It's very. Which shout out, hey, if you're going to living room or if you want to come, like we do foundations like every quarter, so 8 weeks, it's free. But
we're gonna plug that real quick.
Yeah, that's right. Come talk to me, 717-598-6853. That's probably
this is gonna be all over the place.
That's fine.
All right,
give me a call. I love talking to people. But anyway, might need to bleep that out. Anyway. the class. So I tell people, I'm like, hey, like if you exit this class, looking more like Jesus, like if that's all that happens, you look a little bit more like him. That's a win. Even if you can't recite, the Romans Road to me, or give me perfect doctrine, And the doctrine's important, but at the end of the day, if you look a little bit more like Jesus, he'll lead you towards perfect doctrine. So, I'm not worried. So, yeah.
Oh man! So you have had quite a spiritual journey. I know from just all the talks that we've had, and we don't get to see each other a lot. So when we do get together, it's it's just always a blessing to be able to sit down and talk with you. I love talking with you. I love the way that your brain thinks too, when you're especially picking through different things happening in your life.
Quite a bit,
yeah. So while you just give the folks at home just a little brief kind of testimony. Just kind of how you came to know the Lord and what led you to Worship Center in the living room and just kind of where you're at now.
Yeah. Wow. That's a big question. So I
don't think it's really a question.
So we actually teach this at Equip, okay, where you have your, I don't know if we taught this last time, but there's this idea that you can have a 1 minute, you can have a 5 minute, and you can have a 1 hour testimony, right? And you're supposed to know every version of that.
Oh, goodness.
In case you have a situation where you only have, a 1 minute, you only have 1 minute, or you have 5 minutes, you have someone for a little bit longer, or sometimes you have a whole hour to share. So I'm not going to take the whole hour. I'll try to bring it down a little bit. But I grew up in a Christian household. I was born in Missouri. I got saved, quote unquote. I believe it was my actual point of salvation. I think the Lord honored it, even though I was 5 and I was honestly just scared of hell. And everybody else in my family was saved. And so I thought, well, okay, like that's the thing to do, right? Yeah. Like I have to. Yeah. But honestly, like I said, just previously, I think the Lord did still honor that, I think sometimes people doubt it. I'm like, oh, well, it was a decision I made so long ago. Like, is it, and if you don't have a relationship with him, like, okay, maybe you didn't. But at the same time, like, I think sometimes people doubt their salvation unnecessarily, just because you overthink it, where the Lord is very gracious and he sees, he rewards the smallest of steps. So, even though I was 5 and I was freaking scared of hell, and I just was like, oh, I have to do it. Again, I think that was my point of salvation. So anyway, so then I grew up in the church, and I was just sort of, doing my thing, going to church, hated youth group. I got involved in this ministry with like teens. That was like, we actually were mimes, which is like super weird, but
I'm sorry, what?
we did the boxes and everything. We had the whole
a Christian mime group.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh boy, go ahead.
Yeah, so we did that. I did that for 8 years actually. I did the mime, and then we did an acting part too. That we did acting.
Yeah. And
that was like my first sense of like real community, what I felt like church actually was supposed to be. Okay. Because we not only like fellowship together and did community, but we also learned together. We had accountability with each other. We were friends, but then we also ministered together at the same time. Okay. So it was very holistic, even though it was only 1 day a week. Unless we hung out the other days of the week. Which when you're 16, you don't have a cell phone and you can't drive by yourself. It's like you don't see each other that much.
It's like, hey, bump it, here we go.
Right, exactly. So anyway, so I did that, and I wouldn't say I was a nominal Christian for a while throughout my teen years, but in a sense I was. If I compare looking back, I couldn't even tell you what was going on in my brain in my relationship with the Lord. Like, okay. I could tell you some things. Like, I always felt a call to full-time ministry, so I thought, well, that's like when I exit school, I'm gonna go into full-time ministry. The Lord's just gonna open the door. It's gonna be incredible. I'm gonna be smuggling Bibles in China. I'm gonna be shooting the bad guys and saving orphans in Africa. The bad guys. No, literally, it was I'm, in love, of course, right? But that's okay. What, and that's a bigger subject. But that's essentially what, I don't know. That's what ideological or fantastical, is that a word? Fantastical, sure, something like that. Christianity allows you to do. Okay. It allows you to kind of like, it's like the Disneyland of Christianity, where it's like, you just go when you want to, and you get to choose your own adventure and ride all of the rides and have fun and get a big lollipop at the end of the day and watch the fireworks, blow over the castle, and then you go home, and you tell everybody about your experience, but it's not really like actually your whole life. It's just a single event. And so that's what you get to do. You get to pick events and experiences and build your, frame that as who you are. Yeah. When in reality, you still work a 9 to 5. and you just went to Disneyland for 1 week
Yeah.
every 3 years. It's not really who you are.
Yeah.
Anyway, that aside, so, I had this weird grand vision of like who I was going to be, and I was going to be a missionary, whatever person. It was going to be awesome. And anyway, that never happened. I exited high school, just worked, and I wasn't walking away from the Lord, but I wasn't walking towards Him. And I think if you're not necessarily, pursuing Him, there's not a whole lot for it. If you're not pursuing Him, you are walking away. There is no such thing as kind of like this neutral stance in the kingdom. Okay. It's either positive or negative. Anyway, so I was just working for a couple years, and then I did this online school, which I dropped out of. I don't advise online school to anyone listening. Yeah,
I am also an online school dropout, so
there you go.
2 testaments right here.
2 for 2.
Not to do it.
Striking out. But if you are doing it,
yes,
I'm sure you're smart.
More power
and you're
to you,
capable.
and I'm sure you can that you can graduate. And then I will congratulate you.
Absolutely. So yeah, and then I guess my point of my like next point of conversion almost, where it was like I knew something needed to change. So 2014, I had open heart surgery, and I kind of view that as my first point. It was almost like the catalyst, because I felt and I knew like I knew something needed to change. I didn't know what was wrong with me, but I felt like different people, and I knew I wasn't who the Lord wanted me to be, and I knew I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. And there was that just frustration, that kind of like that just eats away at you, And I had it. So anyway, I go to open heart surgery, and then that winter, 2015, I randomly kind of stumbled upon this thing for this ministry school. It's just a 3-week leadership training school out in California. I'm like, all right, I'll go to it. I don't even know why, but I was so desperate for some sort of catalyst. Yeah. And I had little breakthroughs, but I just needed something that would, I don't know, just when you're searching for something, you're like, what's that magic pill? And it wasn't my magic pill, but it did help me in many ways. And when I went there, one of the first things I noticed was, well, these people are actually happy, And I always thought that I was kind of like an optimist, but in reality, I was actually very angry, and I was very sullen oftentimes, especially by myself. And, I thought the world owed me something. So you can't be joyful when you think everybody owes you something, And so that was one of the first things I noticed was like, wow, everyone is actually joyful. Like, these are joyful Christians. That's crazy. Like, what's with that? And anyway, so the Lord used that. Long story short, I was really offended at certain things in the school, especially regarding like the Holy Spirit. Yeah. And I knew the Holy Spirit was like important, right? And I grew up in kind of almost like a neo-charismatic church, right? And I say neo because they don't even really, I don't even think they knew what they were doing, or they at least didn't explain it. For me, it was neo-charismatic because I didn't feel like things were actually fully explained to me. So I saw things, but then there wasn't actually, the backstory to them that actually grounded it in my mind and was able to establish itself as doctrine, in my heart. And so I saw these things, like the one night. And I think it's good to share the abuses that happen within, especially this vein of the church, especially in regards to the Holy Spirit, because there have been a lot of abuses. Yeah. But the abuses don't negate like the reality and the importance of what's actually needed, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? So anyway, there was this one night, and we were all worshiping, and this one guy comes on stage, and he's like, everybody start speaking in tongues. And everybody's like, blah, 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 blah. Like literally everyone around me, like I don't know what happened. And I was like overwhelmed. Like the only time I heard someone speaking in tongues was the pastor's wife when I was 8, and she went on stage. And, I thought, I was like, as an 8-year-old, you're like, that was funny, And so everyone's just like going on around me, and like people are falling over. And I was like, what is going on right now? This is crazy. And this guy comes up to me, right? And I already felt like isolated, right? And I was just crawling into myself even more. And this guy comes up to me, and he's like, I don't even know exactly. He was like, I think he motioned to me first. Yeah. And I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Like, I can't speak enough. Like, what am I supposed to do? Yeah. I was like, I've never done this before. Like, what's the protocol? And he comes up, and I could tell that he wanted me to fall over because other people were falling over around me. You know, there were bodies all over the floor. And I was like, I'm not going to fall. Like, I can't feel anything, right?
Yeah.
I didn't have any reason to fall over. And he basically comes up to me, and he, like, lets me go over, right? He, like, kind of just, like, pushes me. And it wasn't like a push, you know. I don't know if you've ever been in ministry time where sometimes they give you a little push, right?
Yeah.
Which isn't right. It's another abuse that happens sometimes. But, no, but he, like, let me down. It was weird. It was, like, holding me like a baby, and then just, like, go down. Like, and I was like, all right, like. And so I was like, well, there's nothing else to do, so I might as well go down, right?
There's nothing else to do right now.
At that point, it was a lost cause.
Oh, man.
So that was kind of my first experience with manifestations of the Spirit or gifts of the Spirit, and it wasn't a good experience. And I remember thinking after that night, I thought, well, screw it. Like, I'm just going to be the Bible guy.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
have you ever had that thought before? But, you know, I'm just going to be the Bible guy, and I'm going to teach these people about doctrine because they don't know their Bible, and this is anti-biblical, you know?
Yeah.
And, but I still remember several friends, too, challenged me, and they're like, you know, there is something that you need here, you know, and you're resisting it. And I was like, I'm not resisting anything. Like, you know, you just got to push back. You know, that's human nature.
Yeah.
Like, and you just want to, like, grind back and forth. And, no, you're wrong, even though you know you're wrong inside. And so this was, like, the last week. And we were in class, and I was in, like, the missions class. I think we were, like, focused on the nations and everything because I thought I was going to be a missionary. I thought I was going to be in Africa or China, whatever, maybe Russia.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, this prophet is coming in over, and she's going to baptize, like, she's going to pray for us, like, to receive the Holy Spirit or whatever. And I was like, oh my gosh. So she comes in, and I'm, like, almost at the end of the table. There was only one. We were kind of like in this. There were, like, 2 long tables set up, and we were all around. There was, like, 14 of us. Yeah. And I was, like, the second to last. So I was like, oh, okay, at least I get to see how this goes. So she starts going around just praying for people. And, like, crazy things start happening, right? Like, people start screaming, falling over, crying, you know, you name it, right? Yeah. And I was like, oh, my gosh, this is crazy. Yeah. You know, but I can't get out of here, right? This is a small room. And so I was like, well, I have to do so. I just have to see what happens. So she comes over to me, you know, and she had a few phrases that she told me that I won't say here just because they're kind of special to my heart. That kind of, like, triggered something, and I was like, well, okay, what's going on? Like, why did you say that? But then she began praying for me, and and it was weird. I didn't, like, honestly, I didn't feel any. I think the only reason I felt weak was because I was nervous, and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to get out of here. Yeah. You know, and I even like let myself fall over because I was like, I think that's what I'm supposed to do, right? But I honestly, like, to this day, I don't think it was the Holy Spirit. Yeah. But I remember after that day, even after that class, right? And I was like, all right, that was weird. That I expected to feel. I knew I didn't have the manifestation that a lot of the others had, right? Mm-hmm. But I still knew something had changed, and it wasn't even, you know, it wasn't intellectual. It wasn't, you know, doctrinal. It wasn't even emotional. You know, I don't even know if I could call it. It was spiritual, but I couldn't even say at the time, like, oh, this was spiritual. It was almost even deeper than that. Yeah. Where it was just something that I felt changed. And I was like, all right, this is weird. But it was almost like I had been given something that enabled me to step into a different dimension. Is just such an overused and weird word. It's not what I want to use, but I'll say dimension. Anyway, so I go home, and one of the first things I noticed that was different was that I actually enjoyed spending time with the Lord. And it's not like I didn't enjoy spending time with the Lord before, but I was so focused on myself, and I was so focused on fear, so fear-based. Yeah. And it was so out of an orphan mindset, you know, where I came so needy, you know, and so just with my baggage and with my issues that I wasn't actually able to commune with the Lord, you know, as a friend. And that was one of the first things I noticed, was that I actually liked being with him. I just like hanging out. Yeah. Like we would go on hikes, and I would just like, you know, I would just like sing and pray. Yeah. And I would have these like weird like sermon rants that came out of me, and I was like, where's that? Like, you know, I would just like go on these rants and like just about like preaching, and it was weird, and I'd never experienced that before. And I would have these times where I just would like just dance and just go wild in my backyard, you know, with worship. And I'd never done that before. The most I'd ever done, I think I raised one, you know, my right hand during worship one time, you know, in high school, and that was a bold move. And so I knew that something had changed. And so something I would just even, so that's kind of like been my spiritual journey. And ever since then, you know, I've just been on this journey where I am just pursuing the Lord, kind of. It feels like where I'm like, all right, like, Lord, I love you. Like, you're amazing.
Yeah.
You know? And I learn a bunch and I grow a bunch, and then I feel like I fall back a little bit. I'm like, oh man, like, that was cool. Like, do I want that? And I feel like a lot of the time, I think so many Christians are actually on the fence when they don't know it. Yeah. I know I've been on the fence 80% of my Christian walk.
We were talking about that earlier too, and it was something that we talked about a little bit ago. But that was it last year that you were questioning?
Yeah. So
even
that
if he was even real,
right? So that was an interesting experience. So that was 2020,
okay.
Spring of 2020.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the events leading up to it. Okay, I remember. So I had this conversation with a friend. Actually, coincidentally enough, she was someone I met at that school.
No way.
In 2015, right? So yeah, it's funny. She was actually in the same class. She was actually in the same class. She only was there like half the time though. She had to leave early. Anyway, so I had this conversation with her, and there's this weird trend, and I don't even want to say among Christians because I don't think you can do both at the same time. Where they call themselves like Christian witches. I don't know if you've heard of this, right? They're practicing it's witchcraft, but they love Jesus, or they say they do. So she posted something on Instagram, and it was somewhat to that effect, and like very witchy, right?
Very witchy.
And I'm like, oh, that's weird. So I just reached out to her, you know, and I was like, hey, like as a question, like, are you still following Jesus? Like, and she's like, oh yeah, like, you know, Jesus is cool, like whatever, like. And so we got in a conversation. I was like, you know, well, what about this? You know, we just talked back and forth, and ultimately I was just not understanding her right, because when she said witch, I thought of a witch, which meant that I was not listening to what she meant when she said a witch, even though she said witch and she became a witch, and I thought she was a witch. She wasn't the witch that I thought she was. Anyway, very confusing, right? And I was just like done after that. The next day, I kind of woke up feeling weird, and that happens a lot to me. In the night, I've had a lot of spiritual like struggles in the night, so that's not unusual. But I think a lot of it stemmed from the last night's conversation we had at late, and I was sick too, so I took the day off of work, which wasn't a good decision. David took the day off of work, and he went into adultery. So don't take the day off of work, folks. Go to work. Anyway, so I took the day off of work, and I was just like, I went down a YouTube hole of like atheists and Christians like debating, right? And I had this thought, and it was just like playing in my mind. I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know, they're making sense, you know, when you have someone who's have that thought, and it's like you notice you realize, and I think in the moment I realized it was a seed, and it hadn't sprouted, and it had potential to sprout, and it had potential to grow, but I couldn't let the seed go. You know, I couldn't. I had to water it, and I had to see what it would grow into. Yeah. And that's just part of my personality. It's gotten me in a lot of trouble before, you know, where I'm just curious. I'm like, all right, let's water this, let's water that, let's see what happens. Yeah. And so I did, and it was anyway. I got down this hole, and I felt this fog kind of come over my mind. Or honestly, at the time, I thought it felt like a fog had lifted, where I felt like I was more in reality. Right. And when I was more engaged in reality, I felt like I understood that the craziness of what I actually said I believed. Like just believing in God, believing in Jesus, you know, that he actually became incarnate, you know, that the Holy Spirit lives inside me, right? And then there's gonna be the kingdom that manifests on earth someday, and we're gonna live for eternity, and all these, you know, things that I say I believe, and I realized how incredulous they were, right? And I was just like, I don't know if I can believe this. And I wanted to. And I remember even like, I was actually talking to Josiah. Yeah. Shout out to Josiah. And I was like, I know that I love him. Yeah. You know, that hasn't left. Yeah. But I can't believe in him. You know? And I was at work. I should not even, the whole work week was a mess. And I was like crying in the parking lot one time on a Giant. I was like eating my lunch. And I was like, I don't know what's going on. I feel a wreck. And anyway, and I remember how scary it was, because I felt like what my mind was telling me was that I was more engaged in reality, right? And that my faith was actually a hindrance to my perception of what's real. Yeah. Which, side note, it actually is, which is a good thing. in some ways. But and I remember being so engaged with reality and so far from hope, though.
Yeah.
And I would wake up in the mornings and I just did not, I felt like he had gone. I did not feel anything. I felt completely empty. I would wake up in the mornings and it would literally feel like a nightmare.
Yeah.
Like, I can't explain to you. Like, it was freaky.
Yeah.
Where I thought I was literally losing everything, and I felt like everything I had thought before was a lie. And I had finally woken up from the dream, and this was reality. And I was just gonna die someday and become nothing, and there was no hope. And maybe I can do a little bit, do some art, that's cool, work a job, and then I die. And there was just nothing outside of that. And it was scary, and it wasn't like I stopped praying. I still was, because I was like, man, I need out of this. I need out of this mindset.
Yeah.
Because I had struggled with that in the past. I'd always struggled with God's existence. It's not something it's something he gave me freedom from. And so then when I reverted back to that, I was like, oh man, am I ever going to get out of this again? Because I remember I used to struggle with it so much. And I remember the turning point was I had a conversation with the Lord, and I remember thinking, you know what? The way I'm thinking about it is not helping at all. Me obsessing over it, me freaking out about it.
Yeah.
And I thought, what if I can get something out of this? What if, instead of viewing this as a trial that I want to get out of, I view it as something that I view it as I think I overread this. Instead I was viewing it as like, oh my gosh, get me out of this. I want out of this. I want back. What I wanted is I wanted to go back to where I was, right? And oftentimes I think that happens to us in trials. We're in a trial and we want to go back to where we were, right? We're like, Lord, it was the Israelites in the desert.
Yeah.
Take us back to Egypt. We had cucumbers and melons, right?
Yeah.
We were slaves, but we had melons, right? And that was my thought. It's like, man, I'm in the desert. Like, I want to go back. I want to go back. And I just remember thinking, like, okay, but what if I actually, and it was the Lord, obviously it wasn't my own brain thinking this, but what if I can actually get something out of this? What if, instead of going back, I can actually move forward from this? What if this can actually propel me forward? What can I gain positive? Instead there was so much fear, and so if I attack fear and say, fear, you're not actually gonna own me. I'm actually gonna get something out of you. Instead of you shaking me and taking all my coins, I'm gonna shake you. And take all your coins. And so that was my thought process. It was like, okay, like, this thought is still here. I'm still in it. I'm still in the desert. But I'm, instead of just wanting to get out of it, I'm focused on actually not getting out of it until I've grown. Like, actually getting something out of this desert. Because I'm not leaving this desert until I get something. And that was kind of my thought process. It's kind of like when, Jacob wrestled, with the angel of the Lord, or the Lord, however you view it, and he said, I'm not letting you go until I get a blessing. And the Lord, he could have let him go. He could have just forced him to let him go. Obviously, it's the Lord. He could have done whatever he wanted. But there was something that the Lord delighted in then, that he actually, he saw the faith of Jacob in that struggle, in the tension. And I think that was super important to me, was that my faith grew through that. And that it was a challenge to my faith, so it actually made it grow. And so it only lasted for 2 weeks, thank God. I don't even remember when I got out of it.
But see, even with that story too, and it's something that I tell people all the time, that we put, especially in the Christian faith, we put too much emphasis on these Bible characters as something that is completely unattainable, or something that can never happen. But like, that comparison that you just made, like, that was basically the same thing as Jacob wrestling, with the angel of the Lord, or however you want to view the story as it is. But then we put these Bible characters up on this pedestal of we can never achieve the great things that we do, and not reading into the context of these were the worst broken people that you would ever possibly meet in your life at that time. And that we have this one view of this is how it's supposed to be. And I can relate so much of what you're saying there with I want to get back to where I was. And I was telling you this earlier, and I've mentioned it on here before, that it was January of 2020 where I was just on this spiritual high that I can't explain. I can't put it in words, and that's how I know. And people have tried to say, well, do you think it was just you and, the things that you were going through at the time and everything? And one of our mutual friends was questioning it, and I was just like, well, it wasn't, because I can't explain it to you because it wasn't happiness and it wasn't excitement, and like the closest thing that I can come into comparison of explaining that, it was just pure joy. Waking up every morning, and like I wasn't tired waking up. I was excited to read the Bible. I couldn't wait to get in the Word. I couldn't wait to get out and pray. I was doing this little side job at the time where I had to ride around and hand out catering menus to different businesses, and everyone I came into contact with, like the second I walked in, and this wasn't me, this was what was ever going on with me and God at that time, would like something would just lighten their load and their mood. They would just be like hi, and I would joke around with them a little bit and just kind of go off of that. But as time went on, I felt like he left, and I spent a good portion of the months being like, what happened? Why can't I be back in January? Why can't I be back in January? And I have not to this day in over a year have felt the way that I did in January. And I think that that's a reason, because I was so, I don't want to keep using the word spiritually high, but I was just so like just off on this just walking in the spirit, as you would say, that it was like after it went away, I'm like, this is totally unattainable again. But really, he was saying to me, you were so excited to get up and be with me in the morning and worship me and praise me throughout the day and walk with me throughout the day. And now that bad things are happening to you, where did that go? Where did that go? And you brought up the David, the adultery story and everything. Well, we don't look into at the end of that part when the child had died, and the two men were like, how do we tell him? And he gets up and he's like, is the kid dead? And they're like, yeah. And he just went in and just started praising, just went right back to worship. He was praying for 7 days that the child would live, and he didn't. And our first response to this, I think, is always, why me, or what is happening, instead of, what are you doing? What are you up to? And you hear so many times like, oh, don't question God, he's in control of everything. And I say no, I say question God. And I don't say it to the point of like, you should question everything about it, but most things question, because he's going to respond to you. And I think he wants us to question, because I think that we shouldn't walk blindly in faith, even though that's, in the Bible. But I mean, like, as far as what you were saying with that reality and the perspective of things, everybody views life from their perspective. That's the joy of free will. That is the joy of being a human being. My perspective is not the same as your perspective. Even as we're sitting here right now, I'm viewing a different perspective of this room than you're viewing. So you can't see what I'm seeing, and I can't see what you're seeing. Now that's how we would come together then and sharpen each other, because you can tell me what you're seeing over here on this side behind me. I can tell you what I'm seeing over there on that side behind you. So when we start to dissipate this whole "you left me," I don't think that we're responding right to it. Just kind of like you're saying, like, well, no, instead of trying to be like, get me out of here, what can I do to get through this?
Yeah, that's important. And I think even too, like, with the questioning, right? And I think questioning is good. I think oftentimes where it leads us astray, and what's important is how you question. What's your motive for questioning? Yeah. Because there's been people, right? Like, we could compare the story of Zachariah and Mary. Yeah. They both almost asked the same question. Yeah. But the motive was different. Yeah. One was almost mocking, and one was in doubt. And the other one was out of curiosity and just like, all right, well, like, I know reality. But I want to, I'd like an answer to this, because I'm a human. I don't understand everything. Yeah. I think God responds to both. Like, even if you are in doubt, I think he still will respond to you, because he's gracious and loving. Yeah. But I think you'll have a much harder time and a much harder process in order to get to the place where you actually want to find your answer, rather than if you say, okay, like, I'm curious about this, Lord, like, I want to ask you a question, but you check your heart and you make sure you do it, because the scripture says he gives grace to the humble, but he resists the proud. I've experienced that in my life. Probably everyone's experienced it in their life, even if they don't realize it. Because pride's the first sin. It's it's what leads to pretty much everything, because it says that I'm not dependent on you, I'm independent, right? And we were created for a dependency on God. And so when we are humble, that's what the Lord loves to see. And so he's gonna answer that. And so I think the questioning thing is great. It's just, what's your motive?
What is the motive behind it?
Right.
And
What's your attitude?
Your ego's the biggest killer
Right.
of everything.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
the biggest ego trip of all is trying to kill your own ego.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you need to, one, I think, rely more on, if you are in the Christian faith, rely more on letting God take that over because, what is it, Isaiah? My thoughts are not your thoughts. My thoughts are higher than your thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So to one, try and understand, like, I can't see the perspective or perception of God, but I am willing enough to lay myself down to let him show me a glimpse of it, because we can't see. I could have never seen myself sitting here having this conversation with you 8 years ago when I was just basically a heathen, not walking in anything. No, it was a little bit more than 8 years ago, but you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
But he saw the bigger picture out of
Right.
that while I was
Right.
walking through that. And I don't think
Right.
it was ever something that was like, I believe everything happens in our life for a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I think that even if you aren't doing what God had intended for you in your life, that when you are walking through that, eventually there's going to be a little silver lining of, okay, you didn't do what I told you to do. You went your way, but I'm still going to take your way and still make it my way.
Right. I hear what you're saying. Well, yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure if I agree with you completely.
Well, I think I'm probably not wording it right.
Right. I think I get what you're saying.
I'm
'Cause
saying
he works all things,
correct
according to good.
for his good. I'm
Right.
saying like, all right, let's say you're walking down this road here. Okay, this is
Right.
the road that God intends you to be, but our own free will, our self pride, and everything is we were like, okay, something went.
I'm gonna go check out that
something
brush over
shiny's
there.
over here. I'm
Yep,
gonna go over
love
here
that.
real quick and then just check that out real quick.
That's me.
So like while you're there though, you can either choose to one, stay there in that, or you can one, return to what you were supposed to do by repenting, by praising, by worshiping, by just letting him in,
Yeah.
and then he can be like, okay, so I had this for you. You went over here. You recognize me. I'm going to take it. I'm going to take this now. It's not going to be the same thing that I had intended for you
Right.
originally, but now we're over here.
Right, yeah. And I think that's even why I think people, like you hear and you even said it earlier, and I don't think you mean it exactly the same way that a lot of people mean it, but, everything there happens for a reason, right?
Yeah.
Which I don't agree with. Like, I don't personally believe that. I think why people see that, because they see, well, this happened, like, for example, something tragic, like my mom died when I was 9 from cancer, and my dad just became an alcoholic or whatever. It was terrible, toxic household that I grew up in, and they're thinking, well, because of that though, like then I had this, I really pushed myself to succeed in this one area, whatever it is, and then I got a scholarship, and then I became this person and I'm successful now. And would that have happened because, it all happened because of that?
Yeah.
And so they trace, kind of the lineage of their success
Back to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they think, well, everything happens for a reason. See, that was the reason.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't think that's necessarily true because, again, there is free will. And I think what they're seeing is that the Lord always is, working everything, for good.
Yeah.
Whereas the enemy is trying to always work things, opposite. Always trying to destroy, always trying to tear down, always trying to make sick, And so, I think, hey, if their mom hadn't died, or if their dad hadn't ever become an alcoholic or whatever, and they had a great family, who's to say that then they wouldn't have some other inspiration to become largely successful, And I think when we say that, it oftentimes puts, I think, the power and the authority of the Lord in a box. Because then we say, well, this couldn't have happened if that hadn't have happened,
Are you saying more so like that God made this happen for a reason, or more so?
Almost like,
I agree with you
because of this.
Yeah.
Like, for example, who's the woman that she had a diving accident when she was like 18, 19, and now she's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Terry.
I can't remember.
Not Terry.
I can't remember the life of the name. I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, probably people listening. Hopefully
Yeah.
you know it. But anyway, so Johnny Erickson, right? Johnny Erickson. I think it's Johnny Erickson.
I don't remember.
I'm pretty
dude,
sure.
I'm
It's
sorry.
Johnny.
I just remember the diving.
Yeah. And he like draws like realistic horse drawings with her mouth or whatever. She has a
Yeah.
pencil in her mouth. Anyway, so Johnny Erickson, right? And she's had this large, really successful ministry. Because she is disabled, right?
Yeah.
And so she's reached the disabled community with her testimony. She's reached, millions of others.
Yeah.
with her faith,
Yeah.
you know, because she's just had this outlook of joy and perseverance amidst, you know, great suffering
Yeah.
that's come to her through this accident. You know, I've had this conversation with people where they say, well, like, how could that, you know, how could it have not been God's will for her to have that accident, or, you know, and not to heal her, right? Because like, look at all the people she reached, you know. And I think that's just a small way of looking at how the Lord works. He's outside of time, you know.
And
He
that's
could have used something else.
part of that too. You know, that accident happened off of something that she wanted to do.
Right.
You know, so it wasn't like God put her in that place at that time for that accident to
Right.
happen. She wanted to do that, and that's what it happened. But I think that's more so of where I'm saying, you know, the line and then kind of going off
Coming
because
back,
you
yeah.
have the free will to do
Right.
anything. But with the success thing, you know, how do you measure success? And that is a great question, because I mentioned this on the podcast with Troy before. You know, I know atheists that have these great big houses and the white picket fence and the family and the dog, and they're pretty happy. But
Yeah.
and then I know Christians that have these great big houses and the white picket fence and the dog in the house, and they're pretty happy. So who's right? You know, that's where I think we take success from a very secular view, that we're weighing them by these things. And when we can strip away the things and see what's in the heart, I think that's really where the success is coming from. Are you going to live by the golden rule of what Jesus said? You know, hang the prophets and the commandments on these.
Mm-hmm.
You know, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and then love your neighbor as you love yourself. And I don't think loving yourself is waking up in the morning and being like, gee willikers, I love myself. I think it's more so of like, you brushed your teeth, you know, you took a shower, you fed yourself, because if you didn't love yourself, you wouldn't do those things.
Right.
And judging off of like success, well, you know, you can have some millionaire donate all this money to charity. Where's his heart? Is he just doing it because he wants to do it there? Or you can have the lady that went up to Jesus and gave the last of her money to him just because of her faith. So it's funny to me though how when, you know, we step back just for a moment and actually kind of look into context of what was happening in those stories, what was happening when Jesus was healing the sick, when he was doing all of these things, that it's very simple. And I think that we start to miss the simplicity of walking through this life because of the perspective. And then we're expecting all of these things that we see from radical Christianity, from I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, like the things that you were experiencing.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that those things are bad. I'm just saying that we look at those things, I think, more so of the gifts of the Spirit and trying to chase the gifts of the Spirit instead of just going through life and being like, hey, there was, I don't like to say this too much because I really try not to promote that I do this, and it's a pride thing. And anyway, but
Just say it.
I visit homeless people
Yeah.
almost every week. And there was this one lady out there. She was new, and we didn't recognize her. And her name was Larissa, and she was out there with her husband. And her husband had gone to the store at the time, so she was on the bench, and we were talking to her a little bit. And you know, she says, "Oh yeah, I'm a believer." Now, when you are out there, there's a lot of homeless people that will say, "Yeah, I believe in Jesus," yada yada yada, and then you know, turn right back around and do what they're doing. And I'm not trying to judge anybody by that, but you can kind of tell who is genuine when they say that and who's not. This woman said something so profound to me where I had like one of those outer body experiences. Like I was just focused on her and everything around me was just black, and she was just like, she's like, I'm gonna butcher it, but it was in the sense of, yeah, I'm homeless, but what was it? Yeah, I'm homeless, but God is still on His throne. I'm going to praise Him every single day.
Mm-hmm.
And she started preaching to us. Probably a better preacher than half of the pastors I've ever heard in my life. I mean, it was crazy. And here she is, literally has absolutely nothing, but her heart and how she was also taking care of the other people that were there too as well. Praise the Lord. We only saw her 2 more times after that, and then I think they ended up getting placed. So I was really happy about that. But that's what I mean by the success thing, the judging the success part of it. Like that's very successful to me, to be able to be in that position right there and still realize that and she's like, I wake up every morning singing praises to him. I'm praying all day and everything like that. I mean, that is just a measure of success to me. And I think that we miss out on the simplicity and the joyfulness of life by trying to chase after things in which we are trying to make happen. Like you were saying with your story too, what do I do with the falling down? Do I just do it because everyone else is doing it around me and everything? We get too caught up in these things. Yeah. At least that's my opinion with it.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. And I mean, this is even something, I was thinking about, like, this is a breakthrough I've recently had actually with this. And I've always thought, like, ever since I was young, like, man, if we just understood eternity, and the vastness of it, and the smallness of life in comparison. I've always thought if we actually had that perspective, I feel like we'd live a lot differently. And you've probably heard that a million times before. Yeah. But I feel like no one actually gets that perspective.
No.
Because we all still have our noses to the ground. Yeah. We're all still chasing our tails and all still going crazy over these temporary things.
When do you lay your life down and pick up your cross?
Right.
And not just say the words and actually take it into action. I think that's been a problem with Western Christianity and American Christianity over the generations. And again, it's not our faults. It's not our parents' faults or our grandparents' fault. It's just, it's
but at the same time, maybe it
happened. But you can't pinpoint it exactly when it happened, though, because it's just been like this for so long. But to the point of just like, when is the talking about it going to relate into the action of it? I go to Jesus when he said when the Sadducees and the Pharisees were questioning him, and he's like, look, even if you don't believe my words, believe the miracles, believe the things that are happening, and I feel like we're almost in this point of where true revival is going to come back, and we were talking about this earlier before we started this, and I don't think that revival is going to be televised or publicized, and if it is, I don't think it's true revival. I think it's going to slowly creep up, and there's really going to be a stirring in the church to get back to this biblical narrative that always was.
Yeah. Well, and it's the whole thing, and this is something I'm super passionate about, is just your own intimacy with the Lord. And I feel like for so long, too, I went to a great ministry school that was focused on ministering according to the gifts of the Spirit, which was great. It taught me a whole lot. Like, it was an amazing community, and I saw some cool things, and did some cool things, that I'd never done before, right, because of the Lord. But I feel like so oftentimes there's a lot of that focus, right? And that's biblical. Paul says to earnestly desire, spiritual gifts, especially that you may prophesy. He talks a lot about, there's practical things you can do in order to cultivate and to exercise the gifts of the Spirit. But so oftentimes I feel like we're so focused on doing, which is great, and I don't want to take away from doing. I love doing. I think doing is important. But if it's not out of pure intimacy with the Lord and love for the Lord, it's just nothing.
There's that word. This is where I think it's the age-old debate of James. Show me your faith without works, or show me works without faith. But the biggest thing that we miss, I believe, with Paul is one of the most quoted scriptures out of, I believe it's either Romans or Corinthians, where, if I speak in the tongue of men and of angels but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I deliver my body up to be burned and have not love, I gain nothing. I am nothing without love. And that's why I will always bring it back. Now, but to clarify, when I'm speaking about the love, there's a lot of love being preached right now throughout secular world, throughout, all these new age religions, these, everywhere.
Yeah.
It has to be a pure, genuine love, though. It can't be a love that is, look at me and look what I'm doing, which I believe that we see so much happening. And this is where I start to get angry and bitter, and I need to just have grace and ask for grace in that, too, where I see it. But I see it happening so much in the church, and it just puts a bad taste in my mouth, where I'm like, I can understand why people don't want to really give their life to the Lord. Because, you're doing the same thing that the next Instagram model is doing. Right. When are we going to stop and understand of, like, I'm looking across right now, do I genuinely love you in order to lay my life down for you?
Yeah, and I think it's such a convoluted word, too, that it's hard for us to actually understand it. Like the Greeks had, I think 7 words?
Yeah, I think it's like 5 or 7. Yeah. The
used to hear
agape,
5,
the
and now
bus-
someone was like, they actually had 7. I was like,
Yeah.
all right, they have 7.
Okay, they have 7.
But
Thank you.
and it's such it is such a it's so many facets and forms. It's hard to kind of pin it all on one word.
Yeah.
But even talking about 1 Corinthians 13, and this idea, it is how driven and how focused on doing and success, American culture and Christianity as a result has become.
Yeah.
I had this revelation a couple of years ago when I was in ministry school, and I was reading 1 Corinthians 13, and I realized, it's like, wait a second, he's actually talking about all the things. So you ever heard, you hear people all the time, that say love is a choice, right?
Yeah.
Love is an action, right? It's not a feeling, which there's truth to that.
Uh-huh.
But is it a whole truth? Not completely.
No.
And 1 Corinthians 13 actually Paul differs from that line of thought there, because he lists all these actions. So if we saw someone doing all the things that he said he was doing, so they're praising, they're ministering, they're I don't think they were raising the dead in the passage, but they were doing stuff. They're helping the poor, giving their body to be burned, so they're a martyr, even a martyr, right?
Yeah.
And yet he says if they don't have love, it's nothing, right?
nothing.
And so then the love as an action phrase actually gets trashed by Paul, according to that passage.
Yep.
Right, because it's not just action.
No.
We know this. We know it's actually a feeling.
Yeah.
But then, so there's always this tension between action and feeling, right?
Absolutely.
Action and attitude.
Yeah.
And we can obsess over one or the other, and either one without the other is incorrect.
Which then relates
it's
back to
impartial.
the intimacy thing that you're talking
Right,
about.
and so
too.
you need both.
It has to have
And so
both.
if the action doesn't come out of that intimacy, it's not. It's it does good,
Yeah.
but it's not something that is really counting towards anything, according to the Lord, And so I think that's why it's so important too. Something I just try to do too, and we were talking about the heart earlier, is just when I'm doing something, even you're talking about the homeless, I love, helping out with the homeless too. I made this friend about a year ago, and we've had a relationship on and off, and there's been so many times that he's asked me, for money. And there's been so many times where I'm like, I just freaking don't want to do it.
I want to say to you, too, before you tell this story, that I was so happy that you posted that, because I really think people needed to see that, because it wasn't you being prideful of a look at what I'm doing.
Right. And I didn't
and
know.
I knew you were worried about that. Honestly, as soon as I saw that come up on my feed, I'm like, he is going to be so in his head about this and with posting this. and I wanted to comment on it, but I was like, I'll wait till he comes on the podcast to tell him. But I'm so proud of you. Because
Thanks, yeah.
it's something that people need to hear and understand, because you were literally walking through that whole entire experience with him. You were walking with this guy for over a year.
Right.
I was there the one night with you when we went out to Prince Street and met him outside and did all this. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it was something to me where I'm just like, that is what needs to be told, and not this, I'm going to go to Philadelphia, hand out a bunch of stuff to homeless people, feel good, and then come back to my nice warm house and not care about it again.
Yeah. And I think that's the problem. You've heard all the things about short-term missions and everything. Yeah. I think there's, I don't want to completely bash them. I think there's benefits, right? But so anyway, so go back to the story with with my friend. Now I'm trying to remember. But so there were so many times that he asked me, right? For money, and he always had a problem. There's always something, right? There's always a story. And honestly, I'm a trusting guy. I trust people easily, and so I didn't think he was on drugs. The whole time I knew him. There was one or two times where I was like, "Oh, what's he actually doing with the money?" Right? Because again, not out of pride, but I really want to, and I even shared this. I really want to stretch people's thinking when it comes to giving and investing in homeless people. And my friend John, we've had the same conversation. Where they're all stereotyped in this one bunch. And instead of viewing it as, I'm going to give this guy a few dollars or whatever, which is great too, do that.
Yeah.
It's what can you do to invest, rather than just spending money here and there. What can you do to truly invest? Are you actually willing to drop a significant amount of money or time or any resource, into an individual that you feel you need the help? And so there were so many times that John asked me for money, and I was just like, man, I can do it, but I don't want to. Yeah. And I've been so convicted. I think it's Proverbs 3:17 or 3 something, where it says, if you have the necessary, and it's said again in 1 John. He talks about this same subject, where he says, if you have the goods basically to help and you don't, you know, how does the love of God abide in you? You know,
Yeah.
what are you literally? What are you doing?
What are you
If
doing?
you're seeing help,
Yeah.
you have it literally with you.
Yeah.
The ability to help, but you do not. Why are you closing your heart like that? That's in it. And so I would have to come to this place where I'm like, I don't want to give out of an obligation. You know, Scripture says that. It says, do not let anyone give out of begrudgingly. You know,
Yeah.
Lord loves a cheerful giver, right?
Yeah.
And so attitude is important. And so I would just make sure, you know, before I gave, like, okay, like this is an individual the Lord loves. Like I want to give this the right way. And so I think that's just so important, you know, in everything that we do. We don't want to say, oh, well, it's not about action. We just want to just spend all our time in the secret place and just, that's all that matters. No, there's a world burning and dying that you need to help, you know. But the important part is that you remain in the secret place. You remain in that intimacy with the Lord when you're ministering, when you're helping, when you're doing, you know, you're still in that same place. And I think that's so important. And I think that's what's going to change, you know, is both challenge and change for the better, you know, American Christianity is this idea of, hey, this actually has to be holistic. This isn't a back burner thing. This is your entire life, you know, and unless you're willing, again, like you were saying, you know, pick up your cross, sacrifice your life and actually completely lose it, you know, for not only the sake of the gospel, but for sake of intimacy, you know, with the Lord, maybe it's not for you.
Yeah, and I think just for the sake of humanity too.
Yeah.
You know, because I think that is showing the love of the Lord. I go back to those verses all the time when Jesus is talking about Judgment Day, and people are coming up to him and saying, Lord, you know, we did this in your name, we did this in your name. And then he says, you know, you didn't clothe me when you saw me naked, you didn't feed me when I was hungry. And they're like, well, when did we didn't see you when this was happening. And he's like, do you see this person here?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think that's where we need to really come into, because Troy and I talked about this too the last time, and I keep bringing it up because there were so many good points in there where we're reconnecting with that of, why do I have to love my neighbor? I can go on throughout my day not loving my neighbor at all and be just fine. What is the importance? You know, if we believe that all humanity was created in the image of God and that God abides in all, through all, and around all, that there has to be a reason why we're supposed to love everybody. And I think that we look at that of, I think we more so look at that of, you know, they'll know us by our love verse, the church, and we love each other a lot in the Christian faith to a point.
Sometimes.
And I don't know if that's genuine or not, to be honest with you. And I don't know if it's just people just doing it because they're told that they have to. But I can sit here and tell you that more secular people than anything I have loved, like, genuinely a lot more. And, you know, it's something that I'm working on in my heart right now and going through my heart of, why am I so bitter towards a lot of believers, but can be just so passionate and show the love of God to a lot of my secular friends and a lot of people that I walk through life with.
Yeah.
I think that's where we have to start understanding that there has to be compassion for everybody, and that everybody, I mean, this, I told, you know, I tell everybody that comes on here, you know, this is the point of the podcast. Everybody has a story to tell, you know, and I hope that through you telling a bit of your testimony, a bit of your story, and how you perceive everything and how you perceive God to be, and even that point where you were like, are you even real? You know, is this even happening? But there was that little bit in there that he was running through you all. You're just like, I know that I love him. I just don't know if he's there.
Yeah.
And I think that we're so scared in our faith to ask those questions that it just eats us alive, and we just keep kind of like floating along the river like a piece of plank wood on the sea, just being like, I'm just floating in this big ocean called Christianity, and I hope God saves me in the end.
Yeah.
Instead of really getting to that point. And I'm so glad that you were able to bring that up and tell people that, because it is something that I think a lot of people struggle with and a lot of people go through, because, you know, people look at some of the things that we do and we're like, this is insane. And sometimes even when we're in the middle of doing it, I'm like, this is crazy. Like, how is this happening right now? Or the scenarios in life. That's awesome. My friend, I think we're going to wrap up here real soon, but I wanted to talk to you about one more thing.
Sure. Shoot.
You did something and bought a house.
I did.
You bought a house in September, and you're renovating it and everything.
Yeah.
Now, you actually, your occupation is, you're a property manager?
I am a property manager.
You're a
That
property
is correct.
manager.
Yes.
Okay. So, if you are one of the tenants that
Yeah,
lives for
shout out to my
Peter,
tenants. I don't think they're listening to this. That would be a surprise, but maybe you never know.
So, just real quick, being the young person that you are, what was it like to? And hey, ladies, he's single, so I mean, look at that.
There you go. I gave my number earlier, so
and his number's out there. too.
rewind.
What's it like to be, in a single male right now, just stepping out on this basically a leap of faith, honestly, and just going out and being like, hey, I'm going to buy a house.
Yeah. So I think house buying is, it's real estate investing is a brilliant way, and honestly one of the easiest ways to build wealth.
Okay.
Especially long term. I think there's a lot of other great asset classes out there. But I think a lot of them are actually harder to learn and to master, and there's just a lot more movement around some of them, especially if you look at Bitcoin, or if you look at the stock market, the whole thing that happened with GameStop recently, right? There's a lot of money to be made, but it was just something. And so I had never, funny story, there's actually, I'll rewind very quickly, but for the longest time, I never actually wanted a house up until, and I remember telling people, I don't think I'll ever buy a house when I'm
That's where I'm at right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I was like, I'll rent for the
I
rest
think
of
I
my
do
life.
remember having this conversation with you. Yeah. And it literally, that was my thing. I thought, what's the point of buying a house? I'm obviously always going to be on the road because I love traveling, and I'm just going to have this epic ministry. And again, it's just that kind of the narcissistic Christianity that I was in. But, and anyway, so I got into real estate, basically, in the property management and everything, and that side of things. And I realized that there's this big fear surrounding buying a house, and it's almost, I don't want to say stigmatized, but there's a lot of fear around it, and it's very misunderstood. And people think it's a bigger leap of faith than it is. And it's not, again, you said it was it is, in some regards, especially, depending on the individual. But I think a lot of times it's just a big cardboard castle that people think is made out of stone until you go up to it, and you got to get a little closer, than far off when it's casting its shadow on you, and you think the end of the world's coming.
Yeah.
There's so many people that are renting and just wasting their money not investing in something they could be. And if renting's for you, that's great. But basically, long story short, I just wanted to buy a house because, again, I don't think renting long term, unless you're a very transient person. Yeah. Is ideal. Yeah. I don't think it's necessarily smart. I think you can buy a house. There's so many ways to buy a house. I didn't buy it very conventionally at all. I barely have any of my own money into it right now too. There's just a lot of ways you can buy a house. Yeah. And anyway, and one of the other things I wanted to is I just love being hospitable. Okay. I love having people over. Yeah. I've always liked just large groups and just having people and just being an open place, for people, a safe place for people. And when you're renting from someone else, you can't necessarily do that, right? You be like,
for the most part, unless they don't care.
Right, exactly.
I mean, crap, you can build a podcast studio in one.
Right, that's right. Yeah. So, there's just only so much you can do. And so I was like, well, the next step obviously would just be to buy my own place, and so I did. And it's a mess. It's a work in progress, but it's taught me so much already, and I've just enjoyed the process. So.
That's awesome.
We'll see what happens.
That's so awesome. Oh, my friend, thank you so much for coming on. Yeah. I thought we had a really good conversation. I would love to have you back. It'd be great to come back. Yeah. I love the way you think. I love your perspective on life. I know sometimes we don't always agree with everything. I can't believe we actually got through a conversation with only slightly disagreeing on a couple things.
Maybe next time we can have more of we can argue a little bit.
We'll get our classic arguments. Yeah. Well, I wish you nothing but the best in 2021.
Yeah, same.
And then the Team Equip at the living room. Yeah. If you guys want to sign up, you can contact Peter. That's right. You can go to worshipcenter.com and also
.org.
I'm sorry, .org. Yeah. It's an organization.
I don't know what .com is. It could lead you somewhere else.
It could lead you to something else. I think there's a worship center in Texas it might lead you to. But worshipcenter.org, on the sidebar, there will be a little tab for the living room. You can check out all the
young adults, go to their ministries, and then there's all the things you can find, events, and sign up for our class, or just come on a Tuesday night. 7 o'clock, 7:15.
And even if you want to, check it out on Tuesday night. Great worship, great community. A lot of people that want to talk to you there. So that'd be awesome.
We'd love to see you.
As always, we are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and you can watch on YouTube at Wallis Podcast, WALLESS Production. Find us there on YouTube. Peter Douglas, my friend. Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Have a good night.